Okay, so guys, what we've done so far has been simplifying expressions by collecting like terms, okay, that you did in chapter 6. And what we're going to do now is we are going to look at what happens when we multiply things. Now, you guys have a little bit of an idea of this already because we did do a little bit of this when we looked at expanding brackets, but we want you to now get a bit more practice at it, and we want you to also get some real clear rules about it. Okay, so firstly, when we multiply algebra, when you add expressions, for example, if we said 2x plus 4x plus 3y, you know that these need to be like terms, okay? So you had to have like terms in order to add them. So for example, 2x and 4x are like terms, and we should also include the plus there because it's a positive 4x. All right, so we can put those together. So we know that in this case, we now have 6x plus 3y. So this was for like terms with adding. So when adding or subtracting, we must have like terms. Okay. Now, when it comes to multiplying, it doesn't actually matter. Okay, so when we multiply it with algebra, it doesn't actually matter whether they're like terms or not. So we don't need to worry about whether they are like terms. Okay, so it really doesn't matter. We don't need to worry about whether they're like terms. We can just multiply anything we want. All right, now we've got a few steps that I would like you to follow to make sure that you're doing this in a clear way and also to help you so you don't make mistakes. So the first step is that we always start by multiplying the numbers. Okay, so that's the first step, multiply the numbers, and you might remember that those numbers, they will always come before the variable. So for example, in what we did up here, our numbers before x here is a 6, and what we said before is this is called a coefficient. Okay, and we're going to use this word again later when you get back to learning in Dutch, so I want you to be familiar with it. Okay, so we multiply the numbers, and that's called the coefficient. So for the x, the coefficient of x was 6, and here the coefficient of y was 3. Okay, so this is important. We firstly start by multiplying those if we're going to multiply. Okay, the second step is that we're going to then multiply the variables. Okay, and then the next thing we do is we simplify the indices. Okay, so we're going to do a few examples here just to make sure that you guys get what we need to do. So again, it doesn't matter if they're like terms or not. When multiplying, we can do whatever we want. So for example, if I said to you, I want you to do 5x times 3x. Okay, so let's say I asked you to do this. Our steps were multiply the coefficients. So we're going to multiply 5 times 3. So we get 5 times 3 times. Okay, next step was multiply the variables, and in this case our variables are x and x, so we've got times x times x. Now we can just simplify this. Okay, so simplify the indices and also obviously the numbers. All right, so 5 times 3 is 15, and x times x, thinking about our lesson last week about squaring and cubing, x times x is x squared. Okay, so that's the first example. Fairly straightforward. Let's do a few more. So if I said to you 4ab times 2a. Okay, so again, we're going to start by multiplying the coefficients. And in this case, our coefficients are 4 and 2. So we're going to multiply those together. 4 times 2. All right, then we're going to multiply the variables, and in this case we actually have a different variable as well. So we've got 2 lots of a, so we can write that as times a, and then we also have this lovely b here, which we're also going to multiply by, so times b. All right, and now it's just a matter of simplifying. That was the next step. So 4 times 2 is 8, a times a is a squared, and then we just have a b by itself. All right, so it's fairly straightforward. We'll do a few more examples. One a little bit harder. We're going to make a nice big one here now. So we have 7p squared q times 3pq cubed times p squared times 2q cubed times pq. Just to challenge you guys a little bit, we want to do a nice big hard one. All right, so let's go firstly to our steps. The first step is multiply the coefficients. So we're going to look for all the coefficients here. So for the first one, we have a coefficient of 7. So we're starting with 7 times. Next coefficient is 3. Okay, so 3 times, our next one is, there's a coefficient in here that we don't write because we're lazy in maths, and there's really a 1 there, but we're not going to bother writing it now either because timesing by 1 doesn't change anything. All right, our next one is 2, so times 2, and then our next one is again 1. We have another coefficient of 1 in here that we haven't written. So there's our first part. Okay, then we're going to look at all those variables. So our variables, firstly we have p squared. Okay, p squared is the same as p times p. So let's write it out like that. Okay, then we have a p by itself. So we're going to multiply by another p. Then we have another p squared here. Okay, so times p times p. And then we have no p's in the next term. And then in the end here we have another p. So times p. All right, then we'll look at the q's. Okay, in our first one we just have 1, so times q. In the next one we have 3. Okay, so that's times q, q, q. Okay, 3 of them there. And then in our next one we have nothing, and then the following one 3 again, so times q, times q, times q. And then in our last one, we have again just 1 q. All right, so times q. So let's have a look at what we have all up. 7 times 3 is 21. And if we multiply that by 2, we get 42. Okay. Then let's have another look. How many p's do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have p to the power of 6. Okay, then we can look at the q's. And for the q's we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is q to the power of 8. All right, so this is our final answer. We have 42, that's all the numbers multiplied together, p to the power of 6, q to the power of 8. All right, now one final thing that we find really important here that a lot of people make mistakes is you can see here that we're changing the index. Okay, so our p's started off as p squared, etc., and then it changed to a 6 in the end. Now we can only change the index, so we only change the index when we multiply or divide. Okay, so when multiplying or dividing. Okay, we don't change the index when we, dividing, let's spell it right, dividing. Okay, we don't change our index when we add or subtract. Okay, so do not change the index when adding or subtracting. And I'm going to give you a quick example. Okay, and a quick example of this is some people think if we have x squared plus x squared, what we get is x to the power of 4. Okay, but what we actually have here is 2 lots of x squared, so it's the same as 2x squared. That index does not change. All right, if we have x plus x, we have 2x. We don't have 2x squared. All right, so try and keep that in mind, because that's a mistake that we see quite often, and it's one that becomes a little bit difficult to forget about. Okay, so that's your first lesson. Good luck and have fun doing the questions.